she called me out on what I did, and I was so embarrassed, Cal. But that's one of those moments where I was like, okay, yeah, you messed up. This is embarrassing. You should be embarrassed. And now you can either humble and not go into teaching because of this one moment, or you can learn from it. Hi, everyone. My name is Grace Davis, and I currently live in South Lake Tahoe, California. I currently teach for my own company, English with Grace. I teach primarily adults in China. I teach them the English language, and that is, I think most of my students are intermediate to advanced. And then I also teach online for a program called NGen, and most of those learners are refugees or immigrants, and they live in the US and Canada. And they're all different levels from beginner to advanced, all learning English. I like to say over 10 years, probably 12 to be specific. I think I've always wanted to be a teacher. Even when I was little, I have 3 siblings and a lot of cousins, and I remember we would play school and jobs, and I think I always was interested in teaching, but I don't remember a specific moment as a kid where I was like, oh, I'm going to be a teacher. So I think that's, probably just, I was always interested in it.
So let's flash back to the beginning of your pathway. Can you tell us briefly about your childhood? Where did you grow up? And a little about the culture you grew up in.
So I'm originally from Mount Pleasant, Iowa. That is in the southeast corner of Iowa. And I would say it's a predominantly middle-class white town. Not a lot going on. And I am the oldest of 4. We grew up in the country. I didn't grow up around a lot of neighbors or anything. So I spent a lot of time with my family. And my high school, I think, was around 500 people. So once I started traveling, that was really a big eye-opener for me.
When you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up? Did you ever think you would become a teacher?
Yeah, so kind of going back to what I said earlier, what did I want to be when I grew up? I didn't necessarily think I wanted to be a teacher, but I was always really interested in education, specifically history. I actually originally wanted to be a history teacher, and then I later added Spanish. And other than that, I don't think that I don't really remember what I wanted to be. So I know that's kind of boring, but that's my answer.
Looking back on your childhood education, what do you think has changed the most in our education systems since then?
So looking back on my childhood, what I think has changed the most in our education systems, well, at least for me, because I'm a 90s baby, technology for sure, and technology integration into the classroom. And then I also wanted to comment on standardized testing. I think we still see a lot of standardized testing, but Iowa basic skills, if you know, you know. And I think now they're trying to do less of that and more, improving the testing structures, at least in the U.S. And then I think it's similar to my answer for higher ed, focusing on inclusivity and making sure that our practices are inclusive for all students. But I think those technology, diversity, and standardized testing are what have changed the most.
Who was your favorite teacher in grade school and why?
My favorite teacher in grade school was, actually, I'm going to say it was a tie for my 4th and 5th grade teacher. Such a small school in Iowa, but Mrs. Holtkamp or Mrs. Cole, and that was 4th and 5th grade. And I don't really remember specifics. It's hard to remember day to day, but the way that we felt in those classes, I just really felt safe and welcome around those teachers.
Think back to any class during grade school. What classroom activity do you remember to this day because it made learning fun?
Mrs. Hassenfritz, she taught history, and I think we were in 9th grade, and she was teaching us about the Great Depression and the New Deal, and all of that stuff, fun stuff. And we had to do an activity where we each had like basically our own finances and banking, and we were learning all about that. And then it kind of felt like Monopoly, but then on, I'm going to say October 29th, she said, okay, do you want to put money into the bank or do you want to take your money out? And most of us were like making so much money and we were putting all our money into the bank. And then what happened on that date? Stock market crash, Great Depression started. But I think the main purpose was to like pay attention to the stock market. And so then it was showing you, wow, you're making a lot of money in the stock market. And then we were all getting kind of confident. And then she's like, okay, do you want to keep your money or do you want to put more into the stock market? And then was showing us what happened and what led to the Great Depression and the stock market crash. And I will never forget that activity. And I really believe that that was one of the things that made me want to be a history teacher. Like I mentioned, I was really interested in that because she just made it so easy to learn, because we were always doing things like that where you weren't just reading a history book. So that's my answer for favorite activity.
How do you want the American public school system to change in the future?
Big question. How do I want the public school system specifically to change in the future? I think having taught K-12, it was really highlighted for me how important resources are and to pay teachers well, to make sure that there's time for them to have professional development, but also feel supported by not just admin, but like big picture in society as well. I'm hoping that we see a change there soon.
Think about someone who's in high school that may be considering entering the education profession. What electives, activities, or extracurriculars would benefit them throughout their careers?
It's just from my own personal experience, but I'm going to recommend any foreign languages or world languages that you can take. I just think that better equips you to teach not only a language, but to teach your learners. I think it'll help you really relate to them. And then I think for me, it's always learning by doing. So if you're able to do any internships or shadow teachers, I remember I got to go shadow one of my history teachers at the middle school when I was in high school. And that really solidified for me that I wanted to pursue education.
Perfect answer. Okay, so let's move along to the next stage of your pathway.
Can you tell us briefly about your higher education and how that led to a career in education?
So for higher education, I started at Iowa State and I was pursuing a degree in history and education. I wanted to be a history teacher. Started taking Spanish classes, studying abroad, caught the travel bug and decided to teach Spanish. So I switched my degree to Spanish education, and that led me to Spain for a couple of years. And I came back and I was teaching in Minneapolis, Minnesota when I decided to go to grad school. And I started at the University of Minnesota. I was studying a degree in TESOL, teaching English to speakers of other languages. And then I didn't finish my degree there, but I transferred to the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey, which is where I met you, Cal. And my destiny was changed forever. And I was studying 2 degrees, TESOL and then International Education Management. And I finished that degree in 2021.
What professor positively influenced your career the most during your higher education, and what did they do to leave that impact?
This is such a hard question. I don't think I can pick a favorite, but I am going to go backwards. Kathy Bailey, if you're listening, you already know that you were super influential for me. Specifically our leadership class. She, I think, opened my eyes to the importance of volunteering. Sabino Morera was also one of my professors at Middlebury. And those Spanish classes, I think, really opened my eyes to using Spanish, but then to talk about politics. So I learned a lot in that class. And then throughout undergrad, I just had a lot of influential teachers, both in Spain and in the US. But I think they were all my language teachers and just really opening my eyes to different cultures, different ways of teaching, different ways of seeing the world.
Yeah, it's always those language teachers that get you.
Classic.
Think back on any class during your higher education. What classroom activity do you remember to this day because it influenced your understanding of the world?
So actually, Cal, you'll have to let me know if this counts as an activity. but I still think one of the most influential things I did in grad school was when we were co-chairs for Soul, and we put on the conference. Because that was in the leadership class with Kathy Bailey, it seemed like it was part of the activities, and we were reflecting on that. We were also putting on a symposium. So I think that was just one of the most influential for me, because I learned so much. And again, just by doing, we were just kind of thrown into it and had to get a team together and find speakers and organize. I think that was the first virtual Soul. So I would say that isn't necessarily an activity, but it was a project that we were able to do through that class. And I think it really impacted the trajectory of my career at Miss.
Yeah, I agree. I also mentioned in my episode that working on Soul alongside our classes felt like a companion project, even though it wasn't. Thinking back on your higher education, what do you think has changed the most in our higher education systems since then?
Definitely virtual learning, hybrid learning. While we were at Miss, everything went online. So I think that has changed a lot. I also think that we have had, as we should have, an eye-opening to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think a lot of people are being much more intentional as they develop their curriculum and class syllabi and stuff like that. But I think those are probably my biggest ones, virtually, and then diversity, equity, inclusion movements have probably been the biggest changes I've seen.
How do you want higher education to change in the future?
I would like higher education to change in the future by making it more affordable and accessible. I wish I didn't have to go into so much debt in order to study. I think the U.S. is kind of behind in that department, and it should be easier for people to get a degree in higher ed. I'm happy to see more access for people who do have, like, kids, for example. I think that's one thing that we learned from COVID, and as we increase technology and learning online, I hope to see more. I think that opened a lot of people's eyes to the ability to learn not just in person, but you can learn online as well. And I hope we keep working on cultural competency and being more inclusive and diverse, and learning is not just, there's not just one right way. So I hope we keep improving in that department as well.
Think about someone who's about to start their higher education who may be considering becoming a teacher. What advice would you give them to best manage their responsibilities and stress in this early stage of their careers?
I think it's really important to, excuse my language here, but show yourself some grace. This is it can be a really difficult field to get into, especially if you struggle with perfectionism and wanting things to go your way. I think you have to make sure that you can have an idea of how the lesson's going to go and how your class is going to go, but be okay with it changing and then adapting. And then another one, this is kind of getting into tips, which I will repeat this later as well, but Kathy Bailey taught me to set a time limit for lesson planning. And I think as educators, it's really important to make sure that if you are working from 8 to 5, make sure you're working from 8 to 5. And that might be hard to find time to lesson plan. I know teachers go above and beyond, but if you can stick within your time limits of what you're paid to do, that would be my recommendation for not burning out and enjoying the job.
Okay, let's take a short break. So now let's focus on the most critical stage of a teacher's career, the first 5 years. Think back to post-graduation. What was one of your first jobs? How did you get it? What were some high points and low points?
Right after I graduated from Iowa State, I actually immediately went back to Spain because I wasn't satisfied with my Spanish-speaking abilities. So I got a job as an auxiliar de conversación, and I went over to Spain for 2 years, and I was basically a teaching assistant. And I found that job through, I believe, one of my cousins, a distant cousin, was doing that program while I studied abroad. So she told me about it. And then I applied, I got the position, and I was in Spain for 2 years. So then I came back to the US, and two of the people I met in Spain, two of my dear friends still today, they are from the Minneapolis area. And I moved from Iowa to Minneapolis, Minnesota for a 0.1 FTE position teaching
What is
Spanish.
that?
0.1 FTE basically just means I was like 10% of a teacher. So 1.0 FTE would be full-time. And then you can go up from there. So I was teaching 3 hours a week, but because I took that job, I then immediately started subbing in the district. And then that led to my ESL transitions. Living in Spain was amazing. I got to improve my Spanish. I met so many cool people. A big point of that program is to have Fridays off so you can travel. So lots of high points. I would say the only low point for my time in Spain was that it really drove home that I was ready to have my own classroom and really excited to, just basically be in charge of my own classroom and run things the way I wanted to run them rather than being a teaching assistant. And then once I was in Minneapolis, I enjoyed teaching Spanish, but that I fell in love with teaching English as a second language, or ELL, English language learners. And I knew I wanted to get my master's in that almost as soon as I started working towards my certificate. Low points, I had no experience with classroom management, and I felt like I was just trying to keep my head above water. And that really opened my eyes to lack of resources and lack of, just certain things in education that I've mentioned that I wish were different. But not talking poorly about anybody I worked with or the schools I worked at. I had a great time there. And I learned a lot in that first year teaching.
Look back on the first 5 years of your career. How has your practice or skill set changed since then?
Well, I'm fluent in Spanish, and I confidently say I'm fluent in Spanish. And I would not have said that at the start of my career, even though I had a degree in Spanish. One, I have become much more open to the idea that fluent for me means communicating, and I can communicate with native speakers every single day. It's a big part of my job. I only communicate with my clients in Spanish. So I'm really, really proud of that, because that took a lot of time and dedication. And if you don't use it, you lose it. And then I think I'm really glad that I continued to pursue professional development and seek out opportunities to be uncomfortable and take risks and present and do all of those things, like present at conferences and stuff like that.
Who is a mentor, leader, or role model that you are thankful to have had as support in those first 5 years of your career? And what did they do to support or encourage you?
This question is interesting because it's not one specific mentor or leader that pops up, apart from the ones I mentioned from my grad school experience and professors, of course. But I would say my friends. Like I have had the pleasure of meeting some amazing people who challenge me to be better and be my best. A lot of them speak other languages. Cal, you're one of them, always pursuing different projects. And just, I feel like I have had the just great luck of meeting some really, really cool, inspirational people who want the best for me and then continue to support and encourage me to chase my dreams.
Think about novice teachers in the first 5 years of their careers. What teacher tip do they have to know?
I think I'm going to steal the one I already mentioned about setting a time limit for lesson planning. That would have saved me so much time if I would have just truly lived by that rule. And I think time and frustration too, because once you start down a path of trying to perfect, like, this is going to be an amazing lesson, you can spend hours making it better. But if you just say, okay, I have 1 hour today to lesson plan, you set the timer. Once the timer's up, you just make sure that you have your bones for the next day. And I think that would save, especially K-12 teachers, a lot of time and frustration.
This is an interesting tip you're giving of related to time management and focusing your time. You've mentioned using this with lesson planning. Is there any other aspects of your job or life in general that you think this is applicable to?
Oh, yeah, of course. I do this with everything. This is basically my life is divided up into chunks of the day. But I think it doesn't necessarily have to be teaching. Like I'm a transition navigator and I say, okay, for 30 minutes, I need to get caught up on case notes, or for this chunk of time, I'm going to work on this research project I'm doing. This 30-minute block, I'm going to prep for a presentation I have coming up. And I think that is a great time management tool that Cal, I've talked to you about this book, 168 Hours. You have more time than you think, presented on it at a conference actually during grad school. And that I think really helped me just see where I was spending my time and how much of my time am I spending on things I'm truly passionate about and how much of it is on things that I'm not passionate about, and trying to really eliminate those and then expand on the ones that I am passionate about.
The entire time you were talking, I was like, what was that book that we read that was so great? I literally think about it all the time, and I can't remember the name right now. It was that 168 hours.
And I still have your cute little pink tabs sticking out of that book from when you borrowed it.
What is one hard lesson you learned in those first 5 years that helped you to better manage your professional responsibilities?
I think this goes back to something I already mentioned about adaptability and flexibility. I think I had this idea in my head that when I had my own classroom, everything was just going to be dreamy and easygoing, and I wasn't going to have to deal with any classroom management issues, and I was going to have a great relationship with all of my students. And I think I had this idea of what I wanted it to look like, and then it didn't look anything like that. And so adaptability, flexibility, that's something I mentioned for a previous question. But really just, it was a hard lesson to learn, but then once I accepted it and I was like, okay, let's just focus on this today and see if we can achieve that goal. And if we can't, that's okay. And specifically, I think it's difficult for language teachers. I was in the K-12. I was in K-12 at the time, and I think I wanted to have 100%, using the target language, and I couldn't do it with the resources I had at the time. So yeah, I think being able to adapt and be flexible and okay with go with the flow is really important in the beginning stages of your career.
Think about novice teachers in the first 5 years of their careers. What advice would you give them to manage symptoms of burnout?
Chase the ideals and find the joy. I use that for a lot of different things. I use that for my current job. I think that we can get really bogged down with the policies that surround education and all of the grading, and sometimes it can be difficult. It depends on where you teach, but there's so much more to being an educator than just teaching. And so I think if you can try to just stay in line with your morals and beliefs and values in your job, but then also find the joy in the day-to-day, I think that would really help with burnout. And I'm going to go back to this too. I actually had one teacher who tried to prove it to our district that teachers do work overtime, and she would not work outside of her teaching hours just to show how much extra work we do. And so if you can do that and your 45-minute planning period, get your lesson plans done, I really, really encourage that. And then on the weekends or whenever you have time off, make sure that you are actually shut off. Sometimes it's fun to do a no phone day and really disconnect. Those are my recommendations for burnout.
Think about novice teachers in the first 5 years of their careers. What should they keep in mind when they feel like quitting? Why should they push through the tough times?
So why educators should push through the tough times? I think one thing that I realized after I went to grad school was being in education can look different for everybody. You don't necessarily have to be, if you decide that you get a degree in elementary ed, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a K-5 teacher for the rest of your life. And you can add different certifications. You can switch to higher levels or lower levels. You can choose to teach a different content area. And so I think being an educator you can choose to go down a different career path and then be a yoga instructor. Like that's technically still education. So I think my recommendation is to stick with it because it is a field that has a lot of jobs. And I'm hoping in the future things change around, teacher support and how we value teachers in this country. But I think that my recommendation would be if you find yourself teaching classes and feeling really passionate about it and you like the way you feel after teaching a class, that you are probably meant to be a teacher of some sort or in the education sector. So chase the ideals, find the joy, and make sure that you are doing things that don't result in burnout because you're probably in the right profession.
Yeah, that's part of again, perfect guest for my first episode. As I explained in the pilot episode, that's part of the motivation behind this whole podcast, is talking about those example cases of professionals who have taken a path that is not just one classroom, one role the entire time. Yeah, it's definitely a winding road we take.
Absolutely.
What is one thing you hope will be different for novice teachers in the future?
Okay. I hope I already have touched on this, or at least my message is getting across. More support, more resources, more respect, more just understanding across the board, not just from parents, but people in society in general. I think that we lack respect sometimes for teachers. And so I think for me, one thing I really, really needed that I didn't get was how to successfully run a classroom and classroom management. And, I can teach you a lot about the Spanish language. I can use the Spanish language, but if we can't even get the classroom to run smoothly in English, it's definitely not going to work in another language. And so I think, just more support. Like during student teaching, I really liked being able to fall back on my classroom teacher that I was student teaching for. I think that we could, and maybe we've already started doing this, but having more like of a mentorship program, or there's like a designated teacher that I can go to who signs up to be the mentor teacher, not just someone who's been teaching. They're like, oh yeah, go ask this person. You don't want to feel like a burden, but then truly feeling like you have an ally and somebody that you can fall back on if you don't know what you're doing.
Now that we have a clearer picture of your background, let's focus on the bulk of your career.
Where are you currently working and in what capacities? And what projects are you currently working on?
So I currently work at an education consortium in South Lake Tahoe called Advance. My title is Bilingual Transition Navigator. So I work with the Spanish-speaking population in South Lake Tahoe. And as a transition navigator, my goal is to help my clients with their goals. So if that can be career or academic, but they come into our office and we focus on personalized pathways and holistic case management. So wraparound services to help people achieve these goals. So Cal, if you come into my office and you say you want to learn how to speak English, you would be sent to me, and then we would figure out a plan to get you to whatever level of English you're trying to get to. And usually the other goal along with learning English is I want to get a job. I want to get a better job. I want to feel, more accepted in this community. A lot of people I work with are immigrants and refugees, so adapting to daily life. And then two people can have the exact same goal, but how they achieve that goal looks very different depending on that person. Do you have kids? Do you live with, a lot of people? Do you have housing? Another thing we talk about in my job is Maslow's before Bloom. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Do you have your basic needs met? Because if you don't, they talk about this a lot in K-12, those kids probably aren't going to learn because they're hungry or they have other things going on at home. So that's a big part of my job as a transition navigator, really focused on one-on-one and building that relationship with my clients to help them achieve whatever goal they have set. Projects I'm currently working on. Okay, how many can I name? No, I'm working on. I actually, this is an exciting announcement. I was just given a grant from the Turf Bailey Award. Yeah, and I'm going to do some research on how we use Burlington English, an English language learning platform at the college. And I want to see just kind of the impact on teachers and students. So that just came in last week that I got approved. So I'll start that soon. I'm I also, as I mentioned, have my own English language teaching company and podcast. And I'm really trying to dive back into that this winter. I want to start doing some individual episodes and really focus on, I'm around English language learners every day. So the specific questions that they ask, I'd like to do some more recording for that. And then other projects at my current job, we use NGen. I also teach for NGen, and making sure that my students are not having any barriers to attending these online classes. And I want to focus more on the personalization using that platform as well. I would say those are my big three right now.
I find it funny you mentioned Maslow because we're going to really test you and see if you know it. Maslow's hierarchy when we play Gutsy pop quiz later.
Okay, perfect.
There just may be a question. So based on your CV, I analyzed your CV and I turned up with some numbers. So based on your CV, you've worked in 17 different teaching roles in 3 states, over 5 countries, working with students from kindergarten through university and adulthood in both public and private contexts.
Correct.
Both physical and remote contexts. I also counted at least 22 leadership roles or experiences, including 4 conference presentations, very interesting, and 4 professional association memberships. Does it sound nice to hear that in review?
It's kind of wild.
So thinking back over all of these wonderful experiences, what was your absolute favorite professional experience during your career?
Oh my gosh. This is like when you asked me who my favorite teacher was. Honestly, I think getting the opportunity to teach in Spain for 2 years, and I just developed so many skills, not only my Spanish, but cultural competency, traveling, meeting so many amazing people who I mentioned before that have now supported me. That led to more jobs. But those 2 years, I was really living paycheck to paycheck, but really enjoying my life. And I think that I just learned so much during that time in Spain.
I'm glad you mentioned your teaching cultural competency. I also noted you've taught such a wide variety of subjects. Let's see. I have, of course, Spanish and ESL. I have cultures, literacy, immigration, empathy, digital literacy, entrepreneurship, ACT preparation, educational technology, teaching methodologies, and career readiness. You're kind of a catch-all of human preparation, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. I have really, really taught a lot of different, I didn't even put yoga on there. But yeah, I've had a lot of different opportunities pop up. And that's what back to the question about being in education, it can take so many different paths, different subjects, topics, levels, age groups. So it's a fun field to be in if you like to switch things up a lot. And I think that's obvious from my CV.
That's a perfect segue into our next question. Can you think of a job you took or something you accomplished that you had no prior intentions of doing that your younger self would be surprised by?
Most surprising pathway that my younger self, I think, would be surprised about is where I am at now, my current job, because I'm not a teacher. I teach on the side, right, for my own company and for NGen, but I'm a bilingual transition navigator. So one, I think my younger self would be over the moon that I learned another language. And I'm not only teaching that language, but I'm using it in my day-to-day life to help other people achieve their goals. But I never had the intention of being a transition navigator. I didn't even know what that was until I was in grad school and placed in my current boss's Zoom room during Catisol. I was volunteering, and he presented on Advance, where I work now, and how they at the time used NGen, the other company I teach for, at our education consortium. And that blend of those 2 topics, I was just so intrigued, and I loved everything that they were doing and the way they were teaching and their beliefs around how we learn languages, and workforce readiness and all that different stuff. And so I think that, my younger self would just be shocked that I'm in this position and not know what this position was unless I explained it. And also that I run my own company. I don't think that I ever thought that I would do that. So that's a really a big one too.
Yeah, that's also one of the main reasons I wanted you on this podcast, was to think of what it means to be an educator nowadays is so different than what I thought it meant as a kid.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, you're a teacher and you're running an online company with multimedia input of podcasts and everything. It's amazing. And of course, it's part of what inspired me to make this company and make this podcast. So everyone has you to thank.
I actually, Cal had a friend tell me that we need to talk to the Middlebury Institute about adding teacherpreneurship to their degree paths, because so many of us come out of there with like, oh, you know what? I want to do this my way and run my own company. And I do think that there's a lot of opportunity for that. Like you could just, depending on the need and where you live and or not, like you can teach online too, and that's global. So
Teacherpreneurship, I love that. That is definitely a whole pathway of people starting like consulting firms and not just the teaching part of education, but the administrative side as well, and curriculum building and everything like that. That's definitely I want to start a program now. Edupreneurship, teacherpreneurship. I love it.
Do you consider yourself a leader? If so, what leadership roles have you held, or what leadership responsibilities have you taken on? When and how did you become aware of your leadership potential?
yes, I would consider myself a leader. I think I've always felt like a leader because I'm the oldest child. So just naturally in my growing up, like, and my cousins, I have a lot of cousins and I'm the second oldest. So it was just always kind of like a natural thing for me to maybe be, some might say bossy. And then throughout high school, I think that I would have taken on more opportunities, volunteered for certain activities to lead groups and stuff like that. But the real awareness, I think, happened in grad school when we took the leadership course with Kathy Bailey, and she said all teachers are leaders, and we talked about leading through the periphery and all that stuff. And so I think just naturally, all teachers are leaders, and that can look differently for everybody. But my biggest leadership role, I think, was starting my own company. And then since then, I've worked with people. I've had to kind of take charge in that role. And then that has bled into my other roles as a transition navigator and as a teacher for other companies, and presenting at conferences and asking people to collaborate. I think that the leadership just has increased since grad school after that class.
That's a perfect answer. I would agree. Kathy's leadership course was inspirational, but I think your number one would be starting your company.
What is one teacher skill or practice you think all educators should adopt?
Building trust with your students and getting to know them on a deeper level. I think if you can not perfect, but work on that skill of relationship building, which also bleeds into cultural competence and making sure that your students feel safe in your classroom, and safe to take risks, especially if you're teaching a language, then I think that skill will help you. It would help you in any content area, actually, but building trust and relationships with your students. Any chance you get to let students talk about themselves and their experience, that can be, if we're talking about a language classroom, reading, writing, speaking, listening, presentations on the country they're from, if they're not from the U.S., talking about their family, if they'll feel comfortable. Family trees is such a good one that can be really inclusive. And students, one thing that they do know a lot about is themselves and their story and their background. And I'm not saying you have to make them share their story, but if you give them opportunities to do so, that's an easy way to build trust. And that's not just with the teacher, but also in the classroom and amongst their peers. I think my answer for that would just be anything that allows them to talk about their experiences where they then are the expert.
Yeah, I feel like part of the role of a teacher is to use those psychological skills. You see videos on YouTube of like, how to make everyone fall in love with you, be the most influential person. And some of those is like to like say the person's name over and over, and to ask them questions about themselves and to repeat the things that they said back to them. I feel like some of those things used responsibly, I feel like it's part of our job to use those kinds of skills in our classroom to not only build those relationships with us, but with each other in the classroom as well. Yeah. Everyone loves to talk about themselves.
Yeah. Give them the chance to do it.
Think about the professional development activities you have participated in during your initial training, or that were provided by your employers, or that you sought out on your own. What kinds of activities were beneficial, and what kinds of activities were not quite as useful?
I have been lucky enough that a lot of my admin and mentors, bosses have been big advocates for professional development. So much so that sometimes I didn't even realize that's what we were doing. One of the conferences I have to point out that I've only gone to twice, and this year it's relatively new and it filled up, so I don't get to go this year, but it's the Colegas Conference in California. So that's California community colleges, and then supporting the Latinx community. And so you can be a teacher or admin, educator, whatever you want, navigator, classified staff. But that conference is really, really incredible. And I feel like I've always learned a lot at that one. And then I think for me, I've never been to a conference where I was like, well, that was a waste of time, because a big part of doing that is getting to speak to other educators, which I think is what you're doing with this podcast, and hearing their story and hearing what works for them and what doesn't work for them. So anytime I get a chance to go to a conference, it really fills my cup. As well as I always attend at least one session that I learned something incredible from. And then when I was first starting off professional development wise, I'm going to refer to this book I read called Champs. And that was all about classroom management. And actually, by the end of my first year teaching, it completely flipped my classroom. Like I went from barely keeping my head above water to really feeling like I had a sense of control in the class, and students knew what was expected of them. So I'm gonna give Champs a little plug there, but that's been a long time since I've used that. So it's about like conversation, the C. Can we talk right now? And how am I allowed to communicate at all, or a little bit? Is it a whisper, or are we presenting? H is help, A is activity, M is movement. I think P was participation, and I forget what the S was. But each letter basically had something that the student then knew exactly what was expected of them, and helped the teacher kind of run their classroom.
Okay, let's take a short break and we'll be right back. Okay, we're back. So let's head on to our next question. This is a segment called Teach Me Something. In 1 or 2 minutes, can you teach us a concept that is one of your absolute favorites to teach in class?
So recently I've been teaching only Spanish speakers. I taught a group last, probably a month ago, and it was only Spanish speakers, and they kept trying to tell me that they could not learn the TH sound.
Yeah.
Okay, so I stole this from another amazing teacher, Annie Mendez Tobar, if you're listening. And I said, I'm just really struggling getting them to learn the TH sound. And she said, what I like to do is ask them how someone in Spain might pronounce the word apple, for example. So in Spanish, we say manzana, sana, but then in Spain, they might say manzana with the TH, so your tongue comes through your teeth. And so rather than directly teaching that, you just ask the students, and so how would they pronounce it with the theo? And they all do it immediately. And then I'm like, okay, great. So now pronounce the TH sound in English. And like, their minds are just blown. And I'm like, I told you could do this. And so that's been my recent teach me something. And then any chance, Cal, that I get to let students know, well, most of my students know that I speak Spanish. I don't always divulge that information, but I think just teaching people that language is a moving target, and you'll never achieve like a perfect level of English, but you can achieve communication. And so then that really like eases their pain of wanting to have a perfect accent, which isn't possible, or speaking a certain way, or, speaking grammatically correct, which also native speakers don't do that anyway. But that's another one I really like to teach my students.
Mm-hmm. I'm definitely stealing that. The TH is so hard to teach, and especially working virtually, like teaching virtually like I do, it's hard to show them without the visual. So they know that accent.
And I know that's specific for Spanish speakers, but because my entire class was Spanish speaking, it worked out that I could take that teaching moment and teach them that.
Can you tell us about a moment in your career where your practice was significantly altered, where you learned a trick that made your job a lot easier?
A moment in my career where my practice was significantly altered that made my career easier. Yes, utilizing technology. And specifically, I am going to plug WhatsApp. You know, I absolutely love WhatsApp, but not only using that, I then started using it in my classrooms. Again, a lot of my students are from Central and South America. And so I think that that really helped ease not only my prep and how I communicated with my students, but also for them because they already know how to use WhatsApp. And this really was helpful during the pandemic and post-pandemic and teaching digital literacy. So yeah, I'm going to say WhatsApp. And then I really use it as a transition navigator too, because it's really hard to communicate via email if people don't know how to use email, but they do know how to use WhatsApp. So that might not be the answer you were looking for, but I'm gonna go with that.
No, it's a good example of, again, meeting your students where they're at and using the tools that work.
What accomplishment in your career are you proudest of?
I already mentioned that I'm so proud that I speak Spanish. I really never thought I'd get there. So I'm going to say that one more time. Then I was really, really excited last year when TEFL.org asked me to be on their podcast. That was just such a huge accomplishment and I couldn't believe it happened. And that was all because I started my own podcast and started my own company and they found me online. So, you know, those are kind of a bunch of accomplishments mixed into one, but that was kind of one of those where I was like, woof, that was a big deal for me.
What's the funniest moment of your career?
I don't think I have one specific moment. Like I have a lot of fun, but it's usually grad school stuff. I mean, the whole grad school experience maybe, but the funniest moment, I don't have a time that really stands out. And I wish I did. There's so many stories as an educator that you can share. You know, part of that is speaking Spanish and making mistakes in Spanish, teaching and having students react in ways that you're embarrassed or they're embarrassed. I was struggling to think of a specific moment. What did you share?
I actually, in my recording, said that I was pretty sure that your funniest moment might be shared with me.
Okay, because I was going to do that, but am I allowed to share that story? Because that's definitely it.
Okay, I was wondering how you could forget.
When you sent a picture to one of our, esteemed professors during Seoul, and what you accidentally sent a picture of. That was was that your story? Is that the one you shared?
That was exactly what came to mind. That is one thing that if I ever have a bad day, all it takes is a micro millisecond of thinking of this event to just hear me right up and have me cackling. This was when we were working on Soul together as co-chairs. Mm-hmm. And I remember this was specifically the day we redesigned the logo. Remember, we changed the whole name of the conference from FLED to Soul. And then as we did at that time, we worked remotely over Zoom, working together, tried to iron out a bunch of things, planning the event. And I quickly drew a sketch of what I thought would be a nice logo for the new name of the conference. Mm-hmm. And I had my journal here at the edge of my desk, and I took an aerial photo with my phone, and I took my phone and I cropped out to just what is on the page of just one section of the page. I was like, lovely, I'm going to send this to Netta. And over the Zoom with Grace, I was like, okay, ready to go, and hit send. And then as I hit send on my phone, I look up at my computer and I see the email with the file attached. And somehow it had, instead of only picking the selection I had chosen, had picked everything I had not chosen at the bottom of the screen, which was an aerial shot of my gut and my crotch. Do you remember what the email body said?
No, but it was bad. It was like, hey, Netta. Netta is our professor, by the way, who was also our mentor during this symposium. And I think it was like, we've changed the logo and we're so excited. And it was bad wording. What did it say?
I think it was something along the lines of, what do you think about this?
What do you think about this? Oh,
And I have never, Grace and I over Zoom could hear each other gasp.
I don't know how that happened. I was at the local Dunn Brothers and people had to ask me if I was okay. I should have asked you before if I could say that story, but actually I'm really glad that now people know. Like, I didn't have a specific moment, but that is it. Like, hands down.
A close second was similar situation. You and I were on Zoom and it was also working for Soul. And anyone who knows Grace, she's a lovely, nice gal, but anxious about everything. And when we were sending out, I think, the announcement or the call for proposals or something, the CC was included, was like hundreds, maybe close to 1,000.
Oh, yeah, at least 800.
And we're on Zoom and you're like, okay, are we ready? Do we check all the spelling and everything 1,000 times? And we were both sure. And I said, yes, hit send. We're good. And you hit send. And I immediately saw a ding in my inbox. I said, yes, way to go. It's done. And then ding, 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 ding. Somehow the email sent like 5,000 times in a row.
It was so embarrassing. And then I'm in the middle of nowhere, terrible Wi-Fi. That's why it happened. I was in Iowa in my parents' house. We had terrible Wi-Fi. And then Cal's just like, why am I getting this email 5,000 times? I'm glad that Soul really, that was a big one.
Who is one of your favorite fictional educators and why?
I love this question. All right, I was going to say it's a tie between my favorite fictional teachers, between Miss Frizzle and Mr. Feeney from Boy Meets World. But I think I'm going to go with Miss Frizzle because I identify more with her. She just makes learning fun. It's so exciting. And I wanted to be here for Halloween this year, but I didn't get my costume together in time. But yeah, she has always been an icon for me as a teacher.
If you could start over and do it all over again, knowing what you know now about all of the successes and all of the challenges you faced, would you still choose to be an educator?
I would choose to be an educator again. And this goes back to my previous answer. I'm not sure what number that was, but where educator can mean so many different things and look so different. And I think originally when I started, I was like, oh, I don't think I can do this forever. But then I added my ESL credential. I kept learning Spanish. I kept trying out different levels. I kept trying out different skills. Turns out I hate teaching reading and writing, and I love teaching speaking and listening. And so just exploring and figuring out what works for you is such a big part of this journey. But yes, I would, no regrets on any of the teaching experiences I've had. They've all shaped my career, and I would choose to be an educator again.
Yeah, I love what you said. You don't have to like every subject and every part of that subject.
ACT
Like
prep? Oh.
Yeah, no. Yeah. Every artist doesn't have to paint in every medium,
What is one problem or challenge you faced during your career that you want educational leaders to focus on now so that it isn't a problem in the future?
It depends. Are you teaching in the private sector, the public sector? Are you teaching online? Are you teaching in the classroom? If I go back to my beginning days of teaching, smaller class sizes would have been great, and the ability to, feel like I had the bandwidth to teach the types of lessons I wanted to teach. I just so felt like I was surviving and not thriving in that moment. And so I think anything that helps teachers feel more supported, and I know that that's an easy out, but that I think is different for every teacher. It kind of just depends on what they need. So I know I mentioned more opportunities for professional development, mentorship, resources, smaller class sizes. I wish that our country valued education more and we spent more money on it than we do on our military. You can cut that out if you need to. But there are just certain things that I wish we were prioritizing, and it's not necessarily admin or teachers' fault. It comes from, you got to ask why 5 times, and then you'll get to the root usually, and it's not anything in the schools that I think would solve the problem.
No, I'm not going to cut it out. I will bravely take the burden of saying teachers are better than everyone and we should be being paid more than everyone else.
Pay me like a doctor. Pay me like the doctor I am.
Don't get me started ranting on how much NFL players make.
Well,
What is a moment in your career that you are thankful to have experienced?
one moment in my career that I'm thankful that happened. I was teaching at the University of Minnesota, and the person I was student teaching with, another mentor. Now, I want to also defend myself a little bit here. I was teaching full time. I was nannying. I was also working in a bar because, again, teachers are underpaid. And I was tasked with creating like the questions for, I think it was a formative assessment, but either way, I was tasked with coming up with the questions. And a couple of them I did take directly from the book. And I sent them in, and this person was I absolutely loved student teaching with her, but really detail oriented and really, I want to say, strict and very intimidating. I've told her this. She knows all these things, so it's okay that I'm saying this. And so then the feedback was on how I used questions from the book that students would have already seen. It was just testing if they did the homework. She basically said, I can't believe that you think at the graduate level this would be okay, and called me out on what I did. And I was so embarrassed, Cal. But that's one of those moments where I was like, okay, yeah, you messed up. This is embarrassing. You should be embarrassed. And now you can either humble and not go into teaching because of this one moment, or you can learn from it. And I just think it opened my eyes to like, yes, you have a lot going on, but what you're doing is really important, and you need to make sure that you are basically on your A game even when you're tired.
Totally wasn't expecting. I was expecting like happy gushy stories, and that's such a good answer of like a moment full of like a lesson you're thankful to have learned.
It was basically just like a lazy move on my part, and I got called out for it.
What is one self-care habit you practice to avoid burnout?
I had to learn the hard way that rest is productive. So sometimes I think if I am resting or taking time off, that I'm, wasting time, or I could be doing so many other things, but truly taking the time to disconnect, especially from technology, has been really helpful for me. And then planning trips and experiences that bring me joy, and making sure that I put as much joy in my calendar as I do work. And those can overlap, but I think that for me has been really important. So yeah, does that answer that question?
Yeah, that was beautiful.
Hey, and our last question, what does the future of your career look like? What are your next steps and goals for the future?
My future career. I hope it is even more leadership opportunities. I think the dream would be to just completely run my own company. Maybe it's not called English with Grace, but one where I'm the director or lead teacher, CEO, co-founder, something like that. I hope I'm still in podcasting or somehow connected to that, because it really does bring me a lot of joy, and I enjoy interviewing people and hearing their stories. And I hope that I keep incorporating my Spanish and using my Spanish skills in my future career. But I think it's going to be a blend of what it is now. Teaching for my own company, teaching for other companies, working as a navigator or a teacher in the public sector. NGen is also a B corporation. So working for places that are truly trying to make an impact, whether that be for myself or for another company. I think that's where I'm headed.
Now it's time for our mentoring moment, the segment where our listeners write in to ask for professional advice from our guest. This week's question was submitted by our beloved friend, Dr. Kathy Bailey, and she has a question for you. As someone with many hats that you're wearing and many roles that you are currently working in, how do you make time to conduct research? Since you just recently won the Kathy Bailey Award, how do you make time to conduct research alongside your other responsibilities?
No, I love this question. And actually, when I was filling out the proposal to submit to the Turf Bailey Award, my current boss said, "Are you sure you have time to take this on?" I'm going to move some stuff around. And I think what's important for me, because I know myself, I do like to have new projects that I can work on, that I can then go back and, for example, like the podcast. I kind of took a break this summer and now I'm back and working on it. So I have some personal projects that I can kind of pause as I need to. And then I do have a great boss, Frank Gerdeman. He knew I was taking on this research proposal, and this will help our current students, our current teachers. And so it's for the betterment of the ESL program. And so then I know that he will give me some time during my full-time job where I can allot for research. And because I really, really was careful with this, Kathy, to answer your question, I made sure that this is something I'm interested in and something I want to research, rather than, hey, research the Great Depression. Yeah, no, thank you. I'm going to research how Burlington English is impacting our teachers and our students. And I love interviewing our students and getting a chance to talk to them. So I think that answers the question.
Yeah, that's a great answer.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for your mentoring moment. And thanks, Kathy, for our inaugural question for our mentoring moment segment. We love hearing from our listeners. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask our next guest, don't be shy. Send it our way. You can submit your questions by connecting with us on social media or by visiting professionall.pro/pathways. Submit your question there on our website. This is a segment I've been looking forward to the most. It's time for the Pedagogy Pop Quiz, the segment where we put your educational knowledge to the test. Whether you're a novice or a pro, you've got to know your profession. So this is your chance to prove how much you know about the fascinating history of the education profession. Each episode, we challenge our guest with 10 trivia questions to show off their pedagogical expertise. Before we hear Grace's attempt at the Pedagogy Pop Quiz, if you want to give it a try before we hear the answers, head over to our website and you can give it a try yourself. So let's dive into today's pop quiz.
I'm really nervous about this. Just so everybody knows, this is my least favorite part.
Don't be nervous. Don't be nervous. Don't worry about getting it right. This is more just about exploration of some interesting facts.
Okay.
Some of them you should know. I will let you know. I've tailored some of the questions to you.
Oh, boy.
Okay. Question 1. What year was the Department of Education established in the United States? 1978, 1867, or 1890?
1890.
Close. 1867. It was earlier. A lot earlier. So, question 2. Which of these U.S. presidents was a teacher before entering politics?
Oh, boy.
Was it Lyndon B. Johnson, George Washington, or Abraham Lincoln?
Johnson.
Very well done. Yes. LBJ was the child of 2 teachers and worked as every job under the sun at schools, including janitor to principal.
Love that.
Question 3. What percentage of public school teachers spend their own money on classroom supplies?
100%.
Okay, your options are 65%, 78%, or 94%.
94.
Close to what your guess was. Correct. Yes, it's 94. Question 4. In 1954, which U.S. Supreme Court case declared segregation in public schools to be unconstitutional?
Brown versus Board of Education.
You got it.
That was multiple choice? Oh, I'm proud of myself.
Yeah. Good job. You know your history.
Number 5, first introduced in 1953 by Eleanor Roosevelt, National Teacher Appreciation Day is celebrated on the first Tuesday of which month each year?
May.
Is it September, June, or May?
I thought it was May.
Ding, ding, ding.
Okay.
Very well done. You knew that.
Yeah.
Know that.
We have, I work at a college, so every year there's.
Right, that's what, forget. I'm so detached.
Yeah. You teach online.
Yeah. Number 6, which ancient Greek philosopher was the tutor of Alexander the Great? Was it Plato, Aristotle, or Socrates?
Socrates? Oh,
No, it was
My mom.
Aristotle.
dang it.
Famously
Always go with your first guess.
Don't doubt yourself.
I know, damn it.
Okay, number 7. What event in 1957 led to a nationwide increase of science education programs? Was it the start of the Korean War? Was it the launch of the Soviet Union's Sputnik? Or the election of JFK?
Sputnik, the second one.
Nice. Yes, it was the launch of Sputnik that inspired big uptick in science programs. Okay, number 8, according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, introduced in 1943, which category is found in the middle of the 5-tiered pyramid?
This is without multiple choice.
I have them, but do you want?
No, hold on. Let me see if I can do it. I want to say love and belonging.
Wow, ding, ding, ding. You got it.
Okay, well, I was preaching Maslow's earlier, so I should be able to at least say what
Exactly.
they are.
Very nice. Well done. Yes, it's psychological needs, safety needs, love and belonging, esteem and respect, and then self-actualization.
And that's going up the triangle. The top is self-actualization, obviously, and then down at the bottom is physiological.
Very nice. Very nice. So, number 9, what year did the Adult Education Act, the AEA, first pass in the United States? 1966, 1971, or 1980?
Oh, I think it was probably later than we like. 1980? No.
Earlier than you think.
Really?
Yeah, it was
Good.
66, actually.
Oh, wow. The earliest.
For adult educators, I picked this for your adult education
you.
experience.
Okay.
It marked the first direct and sustained effort by the federal government in adult basic education for other than vocational or work training purposes.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, and your last question, number 10. What was the first public university established in Iowa? Do you want your option?
Well, yeah, I think you're going to give me the 3 biggest ones.
The options are Iowa State University, University of Iowa, and Drake University.
Drake. Is it Iowa State?
No, lots and
University of
lots.
Iowa.
It's University of Iowa.
That's really sad. Yes. Wipe this from the record, please. That's embarrassing.
You lost your state license.
Well, I don't want to say University of Iowa. I'm a Cyclone. And Drake's closer to the capital. That's where I was going with that.
Wait, you went to University of Iowa, didn't you?
No, I went to Iowa State.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I should have picked that one.
Yeah. Gosh. Ask me who the Cyclones are. I can tell you.
It was first established in February of 1847.
Wow.
Only 59 days after Iowa became a state. It was the second official act of the General Assembly of Iowa.
Good on you, Iowa.
They prioritized education. Congratulations, you got 6 out of 10 questions correct.
Oh, great.
Passing on a French standard, we can say.
Well, I also hate standardized testing, so no.
This is all just for fun, of course.
No, I'm joking.
If you want more information, check out our website for the sources and more information on the questions I posed to Grace here today. If you have an interesting piece of trivia you want included in the next episode, send us a message with a citation from a credible source. And this has been the Pedagogy Pop Quiz.
Oh, love that.
Okay, Grace, it's time to wrap up. Thank you so much for taking the time to explore your pathway with us. Is there any last things you would like to share with our audience?
I don't think so. I'm going to repeat, chase the ideals and find the joy. And there's a lot of different paths and a lot of different meanings for the word educator. So you can make it whatever you'd like.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. If you want to hear more from both of us, you can find us on the second Professionall podcast, soon to come out, called the Case Report Podcast, where Grace and I will explore some challenging situations in the education profession to see what a pro would do. So check out that podcast soon. And Grace, I can't thank you enough for being my first pilot guest. I've had a great time exploring your pathway with you, and I can't wait to see where your pathway takes you.
Oh, absolutely, Cal. I was honored to be asked to pilot this with you, and I think this is going to lead to a lot of great things. So thank you.
Thanks. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or financial advice. The content has no guarantees of accuracy, completeness, or timeliness. The topics discussed are subject to change due to ongoing research and new discoveries. Always consult current sources. Please consult with a professional for specific advice tailored to your situation. The views expressed in this podcast by the host and guests remain their own and do not reflect the views of our sponsors or any people or organizations mentioned. Neither the Pathways Podcast nor Professionall Public Benefit Corporation are responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this